Hello and welcome to episode 30 of Triumph Beyond Trauma. This is the last episode for season 3 and I'm so excited to bring this one to you. I'll be taking a break for a few weeks and episode 1 of season 4 will drop on November 5. It is going to be a ripper for sure. I have one of my most favourite female police officers and leaders on to chat about her time in policing and the strike forces that she led to get some incredible results and international awards and recognition. To get notified when that's released, pause this episode, hit follow, and then come back. And that way, you'll get all the new episodes. Today, I'm joined by one of the most decorated police officers in Queensland's history, Keith Banks. Keith's career in law enforcement spanned over 2 decades, starting back in 1975, and involved everything from mobile patrols, undercover operations, investigations, and tactical response. His bravery and service earned him multiple awards, including the Bravery Medal and 2 Queensland Police Valour Awards for courage under fire, one of which he received after the infamous MLC siege in 1993. Keith's story didn't end with his police career. He moved into the corporate landscape and after 24 years was diagnosed with PTSD, an empowering diagnosis which has led Keith to speaking out about his incredible journey. Keith is a best-selling author sharing his experiences in Drugs, Guns and Lies and Gun to the Head, while also advocating for mental health and peer support. These are 2 of my most favourite books, and he has a 3rd on the way, which I'm so excited about. I feel so blessed to have been able to sit down with Keith to talk about his phenomenal life. I love this episode, and I really think that you will too. Welcome to Triumph Beyond Trauma, the podcast that explores journeys of resilience and hope. I'm Rosie Skeen, a yoga and breathwork teacher and founder of Tactical Yoga Australia. As a former soldier's wife, mum to 3 beautiful kids and a medically retired New South Wales police officer with PTSD, I understand the challenges of navigating mental health in the first responder and veteran community. Join us for incredible stories from individuals who've confronted the depths of mental illness and discovered their path to happiness and purpose, as well as solo episodes and expert discussions. Together, we'll uncover the tools to help you navigate your journey toward a brighter, more fulfilling life. Whether you're looking for helpful insights, practical tips, or just a friendly reminder that you're not alone, Triumph Beyond Trauma has got your back. You matter, and your journey to a happier, more meaningful life starts right here. Keith Banks, thank you so much for joining me on the podcast today. I'm thrilled to have you here. I've read both your books and I love them so much, and we're definitely going to discuss those later on. But for those people that don't know who you are and where you're from, can you explain how you came to be in the Queensland Police?
Yeah, sure. So thanks for having me on firstly, Rosie. I've been looking forward to this as well. And it's always kind of flattering to have such a lovely introduction. So thank you. I grew up in Western Queensland. My mother remarried when I was 6 years old. Not a very pleasant person. Someone who had a real problem with alcohol, domestic violence, etc., which was pretty common, sadly, in that era. We moved around from town to town in Queensland where work was. He was an unskilled labourer, so I think I really lost count. In the first 2 years of schooling, maybe 8 to 10 different schools, including a stint in Alice Springs. So grew up in that environment, and probably from a reasonably early age, maybe 8 or 9, I wanted to do something that would protect people from bullies. I was bullied quite badly. I had the issues at home where I was a kid that was never subjected to any sexual abuse, but certainly physical and mental and emotional abuse on a daily basis. So, the quote from Nietzsche is, "What doesn't kill you makes you stronger." And that's certainly true for developing resilience, I think, in hindsight.
Yeah.
I spent most of my childhood walking on eggshells and learning how to avoid doing something that would incur his wrath. So, again, I look at that from a positive perspective. That taught me resilience, that came in handy later in life. So we ended up living in Charters Towers, which is a town about 120 k's west of Townsville in Queensland. At that time, I think I was in years 9, 10 and 11 at school. So we had a system in those days called the Army Cadets. I know the Army Cadets still exists now, but I joined the Cadets in year 8 when we were in Cairns. And in those days, the Cadets were probably really regarded as a precursor to military service. So you were taught not just drill, you were taught map reading, navigation, weapons handling. That's where I learned to shoot. Um, how to really give lessons and provide leadership even at a very early age. And I fell in love with it. My future was going to be the ADF for sure. And and my counsellors over the years and a certain amount of introspection have helped me understand that I was simply looking for good, positive male role models.
Yeah.
It doesn't take a genius to work out why, I guess. Um, but that was my path. I was focused on applying for Duntroon, which is now the Royal Military College. I was academically bright. I was blessed with the ability to do well at school, and I could see that was my pathway out of a pretty challenging environment. We were from a lower socioeconomic strata, so money was always a problem. The issues at home were always a problem, etc. But I had a path. Around year 10, we had a visit from a police recruiter, and at that stage, I was really struggling with the home environment, and I thought, yeah, I've only got 2 years to put up with it, then I can escape. When the police recruiter turned up, it really hit me that that was an opportunity for two things. One was to get out of that childhood environment because there was a cadet system, and you could apply and do years 11 and 12 at the police academy with another 12 months on top as a paid cadet and so on. I thought about it, and then I really thought about what being a cop would involve, and I could see that that would give me more of an opportunity to take an active part in literally helping people.
Yeah.
And I think most cops join for that reason. And it sounds cliched and it sounds not on a white charger stuff, but even at that tender age at 16, I really wanted to do something to make the world a better place. So thought about it, and then I just realized I couldn't stay in that domestic situation for another year. That probably would have taken me to a level where I may have broken. So I applied for the police cadet system. My mum, who I loved to death, but like a lot of women in that era, was pretty powerless to escape. She signed the authority, etc., and paid a price for that later because my stepfather hated cops. And yeah, there's a whole raft of conversation around that.
Yeah.
But so I applied and I was successful. And then I left home the year I turned 17 to travel to Brisbane. So that was 1975. And I think I turned 17 that year. So May of that year. Anyway, hit the academy at the tender age of 16 and a half or so, and then had a 12-month tertiary, oh, sorry, wrong, a 12-month grade 12 year, and then followed by a 12-month cadet system. But the cadet system in those days was a combination of, I guess, study and policing. So unlike the academy of now, it was very, very focused on discipline. There was a lot of yelling and screaming and cleaning toilets with toothbrushes and, running around an oval with a 303 rifle above your head as punishment, all of that stuff.
So it's a little bit
Um,
more like a military type of situation back then.
yeah, it was. It was probably similar to what the ADF military academy would have been, but instead of being tertiary study, it was a year 12 study.
Yeah.
So we did normal year 12 courses, but we also did police studies as well. So, if you picture it, you're up at 6 o'clock in the morning, your bed had to be made in a certain way, you had to be dressed in your uniform, present for breakfast, then parade, room inspections, and then sit down in a class and do year 12 subjects. So it was quite an interesting experience. I loved it. I
Yeah.
loved it because I was in a structured environment. I had my own room. I was paid, and I was living somewhere where I didn't have to really walk on eggshells like I had to. So again, I guess it comes back to the Nietzsche principle. It creates resilience. There were other young kids in there who hated it, and I thrived on it. So I did 2 years of that. And then in those days, we had to be 19 to be sworn. I'm not sure what it was like in New South Wales. I think in Victoria, it was 18 and a half. Either way too young, I think.
Very young, yeah.
But so yeah, graduated from the academy, had to wait 5 months, and then I was sworn in as a 19-year-old cop.
Yeah. That's so young, but obviously you're ready for it. And having that training for a couple of years under your belt, I can imagine you were just chewing at the bit after that 5 months had ended to go and actually perform the job that you've been training for a couple of years.
Yeah, I wanted to be a cop. I wanted to
Yeah.
be a super cop. And in that young,
Yeah.
I look back and go, man, how naive I was and how naive we all were, I guess. But in that blush of youth, I wanted to be someone who'd change the world and do all the really exciting, cool stuff and lock up bad guys. And the first station I went to, I was actually a glorified lollipop guy for about 2 months. It was about, in one of those ironies of life, it was one of the most boring stations you could be put at. It was inner city, Brisbane, Barden, sleepiest suburb in the world, I reckon.
Yeah, wow. Very early on in your career, you joined the mobile patrols, um, which is a proactive unit, wasn't it?
Yeah,
Yeah.
Mobiles was the best uniform station I ever worked in.
Yeah.
It was modelled. So we had some issues in Queensland, as I'm sure you're aware, and I'm sure older listeners would be aware of. The the level of corruption in Queensland was not extreme, but it was focused and controlled by very powerful people. That was one thing. New South Wales had its fair share of issues as well, but we had a culture of, dare I say it, a lot of poorly educated senior people who really didn't understand, I suppose, the nuances of policing as much as they should, or as much as is understood now. So a police commissioner was appointed, Ray Whitrod, who was touted as a reformist commissioner. He was hated because people hate change, particularly if it challenges
Yeah.
the way we've done things around here. But he introduced a concept called Brisbane Mobile Patrols based on the Los Angeles PD model. So of going to one centralised area, working with a permanent partner, patrolling a permanent sector. We didn't respond to fires, or sorry, when I say respond, we didn't have to do paperwork around house fires or that normal stuff. We didn't have to serve summonses. We didn't have to execute warrants of commitment. All of that general stuff that is done in a normal general duty suburban police station.
Yeah.
We were on the road responding to high risk jobs, responding to urgent jobs, and taking at the same time, burglary complaints, etc. But our mission was get on the road, look at suspicious behaviour, pull cars over, interrogate people, and pretty much be a very, very, used to be called aggressive patrolling focus of policing. Then I think the public didn't like that, so it changed to assertive patrolling or something.
Yeah.
But in essence, it was, log on with your mate, male or female, sign on as quickly as you could, book on the air as quickly as you could, and get out there and go, right, we've got 7.5 hours to go and lock up bad guys and have a lot of fun.
Yeah. One part of your book, you say, and I don't want to ruin the book for people that haven't read it because they absolutely should. Both of them, they're fantastic. But there was a tradition in the mobile patrols that you weren't aware of until you were in it. Would you like to talk about that a little bit?
Yeah.
It made me laugh. It really did.
And that's the thing about cops, idle hands are the devil's tool. So,
Absolutely.
and if you think about it, we're all young kids. We're in our early 20s, late 20s. So the tradition was on night work or on an afternoon shift, depending on what took your fancy. Um, you'd contact someone in police operations, and an operations centre was giving out all the jobs. So you'd contact them and go, look, it's our turn tonight. Other cars would cover for us. And I thought, what the hell is this all about? And essentially it was to see who could drive the furthest out of their division and back again in one shift. So, so your mates had covered all the jobs that came in for you, and you'd be off. There we got as far as we drove over the border the first time I did it, and ended up in Chindera, which is well over the border
Yeah.
into New South Wales. Took a quick photo to prove that we'd been there and raced back. And we had cars that went out west. We had cars that got further than we did. It just depended how much of a risk taker you were, I guess. And there was no prize; it was just bragging rights.
Yeah.
And it was an open secret. All the bosses knew what we were up to, but no one was ever formally counselled over it. It was essentially, the message was, don't stuff up. You crash the car, you're on your own,
Yeah.
but have fun anyway.
Yeah.
So and people, young cops who listen to this these days would go, oh my God, well, we've got GPS tracking, we've got all of this stuff. There was none of that in those days. You just went off. and
Yeah.
out of radio contact and did what you did. And as I've written in the book, a few weeks after I'd been introduced to this, I saw a uniformed New South Wales car cruising down Queen Street in Brisbane and thought, aha.
I wonder where they're from.
I know what you guys are up to.
Yeah.
So, you've got to have fun.
Yeah, you do. And that's what I really like about, I mean, it's well before my time, but those days, even though they're probably a lot more dangerous because of the resources and a lot of systems probably were in their infancy, but also like a lot of fun, a
You're
lot of
right. Well,
shenanigans.
yeah, a lot of shenanigans, and we had nowhere near the resources that modern police do. And I look at the way that cops are kitted out now and go, damn, I wish I had some of that stuff in my
Yes.
day. Um, there's a pro and a con. Yeah,
Yeah.
we couldn't be tracked. It's like I used to joke about it and say it's like a World War One fighter pilot. Once their wheels were off the ground, there was no radio transmission. They just did what they had to do. It was sort of like we were. No mobile phones, no pages. You just,
Yeah.
you did your thing.
That's wild, isn't it?
Yeah, it was. A lot of
Yeah.
fun.
So after your time in mobiles, undercover work caught your eye. How did that come about for you?
I didn't know there was an undercover area. We weren't really told a lot about other aspects of policing in our training, and I'm sure it happens now where people are aware of it. But yeah, I was very short story. I was on a job in mobiles one night. There was a shots fired call, any unit call in the centre of the city. Raced around there, and it had been a drug squad takeout. One of the detectives fired around at the front tyre of a car, the baddies or the dealer's car when they were trying to escape. And in those days, again, shots were fired a lot more often without a lot of reporting
Yes.
than they are now. So we got there, raced around, and went, oh, well, this is interesting. And there was a long-haired guy, grubby-looking guy with hair down past his shoulders, handcuffed, sitting against a car. One of the detectives said, throw our undercover in the back of your car and take him back to CIB headquarters and make it look good. And I thought, an undercover? Wow. Ooh, this looks exciting.
Yeah.
So, and again, that fitted in with my need to do something different. And this is going to sound a bit crazy, but I'd been heavily influenced by the book Serpico, which was about an undercover narcotics cop in New York City. True story, who spoke out against corruption and challenged the status quo. And part of his challenge of the status quo was he was an undercover cop, so he didn't dress like a cop, but a lot of them did. And anyway,
a lot of the undercovers dressed still like
yeah,
cops.
a lot of plainclothes New York City cops. They had the pants and the shirt and maybe a hat that wasn't a pork pie hat or something. But yeah, they didn't really take it on board, whereas Serpico did.
Yeah.
And I looked at that and thought, wow, if ever I could do that, that'd be the best thing in the world. Because again, I was 22, I think. No, I hadn't even turned 22 yet. And I looked at that and thought, wow, I could dress the way I wanted. I could grow my hair. I could look as much unlike a cop as I could and be in a position to fool people and do something about the heroin trade. So it all ticked boxes for me.
Yeah.
And I'd be lying if I didn't say that part of the perceived glamour of dressing the way you wanted to, throwing an earring in that we weren't allowed to do all of that stuff. I'd be lying if I had said that wasn't attractive, because it was. So I applied for it. I was a baby-faced little guy. I didn't look like a cop anyway. And like a lot of other undercovers in the old days of the 80s, they grabbed me up because no one had ever accused me of being a cop anyway. So, most of us looked like that. We were just young, not typical 6'2", big dudes.
Yeah.
So, yeah, got accepted. And then I just started doing stuff that completely changed my lifestyle. There was no training course. We were simply, you look good enough, start, and if you take some weeks off, start, and then we'll pair you up with someone for a while, and then you're on your own. So, here I was. I'd been socialized into talking cop talk and walking cop walk, and even things simple as knocking on a door. Cops knock on a door quite loudly.
Absolutely.
No one else does.
No, I still do it.
Because it's even like walking into a room. You scope everything out. I still look for exits, and I still look at everyone in the room, whether it be in a pub or a restaurant or whatever. But you have to lose all of that.
Yeah.
And the only way in those days, you could lose that is have someone say, "What are you looking at? You're a bit sus, you knocked on my door. I thought it was the cops." Whereas now, training is completely different, and the way in which undercovers work is completely different. We won't discuss that because we don't want to give any methodology away at
No.
all. But in those days, it was really just get out there and do your thing.
Yeah.
Often we were paired with an informer, and the informer, some of them worked specifically for reward money for setting up drug dealers to introduce us to vouch for us. We'd buy the drugs, we'd keep them in chain of custody, all that stuff, and then people would be charged with supply or traffic depending on the amounts they sold to us. There were a couple who did that for rewards. There was one particular informer who hated drug dealers, even though he looked like he'd walked out of the central casting for the Hells Angels. But he genuinely hated drug dealers. But I also worked with informers who were clearly just setting up their opposition.
Yeah.
So shaking hands with the devil, you better have a long spoon, and you just, I remember working with these guys, and they'd tell other dealers they'd known me for years, and I just looked at it and thought, wow, I know exactly what you're up to, because you would be selling as much smack as I'm buying for sure. And the way that policing was in the 80s, a lot of it was about numbers, a lot of it was about figures, and a lot of it was about publicity. So, if you had a big bust that was on the front page of the paper, that stood you in good stead for the next promotion, or policing budget increases for drug enforcement, etc. I'm not comfortable that we ever targeted the right people, but that was totally out of my hands. I was simply a young undercover guy who did what he was told.
Yeah. Yeah. I don't think much has changed there, though, has it? With the, you get some good
Yeah.
arrests and you get some newspaper coverage.
Well, yeah. Sorry. I could talk about that for ages.
Yeah, I know. So there's a lot of deception and secrecy in undercover work. It's the nature of that job.
Sure.
How did that aspect of the job affect your ability to have relationships and connections with other people outside of that work?
Um, again, this is going to sound a little sociopathic, but I thrived on the whole deception and lying.
Can I ask a question before you keep
Yeah.
going? Do you think it's because you said you were quite intelligent? Do you think it is because you have a high intelligence, it's all a little bit of a game?
Yeah.
I don't know.
Yeah.
I don't know if I'm speaking out of school, but I
Yeah.
think yeah, I have a thought about that.
I've often thought about this actually,
Yeah.
Rosie. It's I don't regard myself as a sociopath, but certainly there must have been parts of my personality that are,
Yeah.
because with a couple of exceptions, I quite thrived on lying to heroin dealers. I thought that they were trading in something that was just one of the most horrible things in the world until meth came along.
Yeah.
But heroin was killing people, so I thrived on lying and playing a role. But there were other people that you form relationships with who were dealing a lot of weed, and I changed my attitudes about cannabis pretty quickly. I believed it was an evil scourge. Now I'd legalize it tomorrow. So I was in a position where I had to buy, reasonably small amounts of cannabis from people, and I hated that because my relationship with them was pretty good. You still have to, it's hard to explain, you still have to keep a certain part of yourself hidden, but you can allow other parts of your personality to come out. And I'm a pretty gregarious person, and I quite like spending time with some of these guys and girls that I was buying cannabis from, because to me they were much more genuine and open and fun than a lot of the cops that I was dealing with.
Yes.
Because the whole corruption thing was, and I've written about that very openly. Not everyone was corrupt. The majority of people I worked with were great, but there was enough corruption there to be on your guard. And thank you for saying about the intelligence thing. I was just blessed that I was academic, but it became a game.
Yeah.
And it's the rush was amazing. So a great friend of mine, Chuck, has and he and I featured in a documentary on Channel 9 a little while ago, Australian Crime Stories, for anybody who may want to watch it. And Chuck and I talk about this a lot. And he said the best way to describe undercover is think about the most frightening thing you've ever done in your life, right? Whether it's jump out of a plane, off the edge of a building, whatever it is, the most frightening thing you've ever done in your life. Now, do it 3 times a week for 2 years. That's what undercover is.
Yeah.
And the rush you get from that is indescribable, and for a lot of us, the fear was incredibly addictive because it brought with it adrenaline, and then it brought with it playing the games, and then it brought with it the ability to do stuff that was completely outside the rules. Because it's important to understand that in those days we had no controllers.
Yeah.
We were just let loose with a bag full of money, access to guns, smoked a truckload of dope, drank like fish without any concern about consequence. Yeah. Because we knew full well, some of us, a couple of the guys got arrested and thrown in the watch house. We had false identities. We just write it out and jump bail the next day and everything would be fine. So that sounds great. But with that, the on-flow consequences were, a complete change in attitude about who we were. And the difficulty of undercover in those days, and probably still is about remembering your moral compass and remembering why you're doing it, remembering who you actually are.
Yeah.
That's the big challenge.
Yeah. And that's one of my next questions, actually, is because it does put you in morally compromising situations. And I know that you had a couple that you've documented in your book. One of them, I don't know if it was too compromising, like you had a gun pointed to you if you didn't do a couple of lines. And I think that decision's pretty easy to make.
Yeah.
Like, okay, I'll do that. Yep.
Yeah. If you're going to shoot me if I don't do lines of speed with you, let me think about it. Okay.
Yep. Let's rack them up. But another one that you talked about, and I'm sure you've thought about it a lot, is Shane. He had a job on the Gold Coast, and he was someone that was involved in that circle. He was a bit younger than you thought he was, and you watched him take his first hit of heroin. You've spoken about that a bit, and it's obviously in the book, and I know that it's rattled you. I also listened to a podcast episode with Adam Bloom where it came up, and he suggested that in a later job that you had, that we'll hopefully talk about later, where you've saved a life as well. So ultimately Shane passed away.
Yeah.
How did you at the time, and I'm not sure that you did, how did you reconcile with your ethics and your morals, like your own personal morals, in doing those jobs and having those experiences? And then how did you stay grounded, and how did you remember who you actually were at that time? Because
that's a great question. I don't know that I ever did reconcile that.
Yeah,
About
I can't
him dying
imagine.
of an OD years later.
Yeah.
I'm learning now about moral injury.
Yes.
So I'll backtrack slightly. Part of one of my passions now is discussing mental health and helping people with PTSD, given that I'm on the pretty much the other side of mine. But I've learned about moral injury, and moral injury is not yet formal diagnosis, but it's very real. And I struggled with moral injury, I know now, for years over Shane's eventual OD, 4 years later. I've often wondered what I should have done, what I could have done. And the reason, or the way that I've reconciled it, is I put myself back in that situation, and there's nothing I could have done without blowing an entire operation.
Absolutely.
And it's one of those challenges of life, is you need to make decisions based on the best information you have at the time. And when that incident happened, I was only 23 years old.
Yeah.
So I looked at my daughters
You're a
as they were
baby.
growing up. Yeah, I was a baby. Yeah. And I remember looking at both of them when they were 23 thinking, shit, I was your age when I was in that world. As best I can, that's how I've reconciled it. We all have regrets, and had I interfered with what happened that night, and I go into detail in the book, as you said, I would have blown an entire operation, and I can't think of any other way, that I could have handled it. And it's funny, yeah, and the MLC siege that we may talk about later, saving a life probably started to turn my darkness and my recriminations around, I think. And
Yeah.
that's the nature of policing, isn't it? Everything's unpredictable.
Oh, absolutely. And I think that's the thrill of it, though, isn't it? Well, for me, it
Mm,
was absolutely at the
mm,
start. And then at the end of it, it was like not so much anymore. Like I can't deal with the unknown anymore. I
yeah,
think it's one of the
yeah,
things that tipped me over. But um,
yeah,
that's one of the joys of it is you never know what you're going to get. And especially I can imagine in, deep undercover work,
yeah.
every day is that. Every
Oh,
single day is that.
yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. And it was a thrill, and I won't hide the fact that it was a rush,
Yeah.
and most of us would be in between operations hanging out for the next one because, it's exciting to get in there and live that life again and lie and deceive and betray. The other problem with undercover for me, and it's pretty much every UC I've spoken with feels sort of the same, is that you set out meeting someone, forming a relationship with them, knowing full well that you're going to betray them. That's
And you're going to
that's
do your best
challenging.
to do it. You
Yeah,
that
yeah,
that's what you're doing. Yeah.
yeah, yeah. I've actually, and in those days we had what were called confrontations. So at the end of every operation, our cover was blown.
Yeah.
All
It's
the drug dealers were told
crazy.
who we were, which Um, and I remember having more than one confrontation, where I'd formed a relationship, and heroin dealers predominantly. I used to buy a lot of smack when I got really good at my trade. Um, some of them, whilst they were trading in a horrible product, were still quite likable. It's quite a paradox, but or a dichotomy, whichever. And I had more than one of them say, "You bastard," And I said, well, it wasn't personal.
Yeah.
Yes, it was. How much more personal could it be? Well, you're right, it was personal. Um, so, but again, that's why I think sometimes I have a bit of a sociopathic personality because I got enjoyment out of that as well.
Yeah. Yeah.
The look on their face.
I think yeah. Yeah, like, oh, gotcha.
Yeah, exactly right. Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah,
Yeah, that's funny. Um, it's something, yeah, the intense adrenaline that you would get with undercover work, like we've spoken about, that would have been addictive.
yeah,
And then
yeah,
you've left undercover, but you would have still had that urge to get some sort of rush.
yeah.
Um,
Precisely. Yeah.
yeah. So then you moved into a different side of policing. And I think was it equally or maybe more even high stakes? I guess you had a team with you, but you joined the tactical response group. But it hadn't quite started full time when you joined, had it?
Yeah, it was. So tactical response in those days was, well, it was initially the emergency squad,
Yeah.
and the same name as the New South Wales guys. And I say guys because
It,
there were no
it
women.
is. Yeah, no.
There were different days. And I went back in uniform for 6 months, which back in the mobiles, which bored me because I'd been in that
Oh,
undercover world.
yeah.
And the emergency squad responded to a siege on the Gold Coast from memory. And I saw the news footage of these guys in blacks with M16 rifles and bullet resistant vests as much as they were. And I thought, I need some of that.
Yeah.
So that was again fitting in with that, wanting to be the super cop. But I always wanted to be at the sharp end. I wanted to be doing stuff that really was meaningful, that I saw as meaningful, and combating hard crooks. Because a lot like Sydney, we had a lot of armed offenders in Brisbane, even though it was still regarded as a big country town. There was a lot of armed robbery of banks. Banks were an attractive target because of all the cash they carried in those days. So
Yeah.
we had a lot of armed robberies. We had a lot of gunmen, bad guys. We had quite a few domestic sieges. It was long before the firearm rules were tightened after Port Arthur. So pretty much every house had a gun. You could buy a Mini 14 or a shotgun at Kmart without a driver's license. It was just open slather.
Yeah.
People can't comprehend that now, but yeah, everyone had guns.
Mm.
So the emergency squad was essentially, domestic sieges. And the 1982 Commonwealth Games, the attitude nationally started to move to counterterrorism. You know, in Europe, Baader-Meinhof gang had hijacked aircraft. Oh God, there were a number of terrorist groups that were killing people. The SAS raided the Iranian embassy in 83, maybe, can't remember. And they suddenly appeared in public in blacks and gas masks and submachine guns and crashed their way into an embassy. And suddenly the spotlight changed to counterterrorism. federal government started to fund the state groups. The emergency squad moved from pretty much a domestic siege response to the next stage of counterterrorism. Special Air Service were involved around the country training teams. And so I applied for it. Thought, yeah, I've got to get me some of that. Applied for it, got in.
Yes,
And
please.
yeah, and yeah, I was a member of that part time because I left mobile, went into the CIB as a junior detective, and I was still a part time member of that. So in those days, we trained 4 days a month, and we were on call. So if anything came up, we were contacted. We'd group, we'd get tasked, we'd go and do the job, we'd kick indoors, we'd lock up the bad guys, and then go back to our normal jobs. So loved it. I thought this has got to go full time at some point. The only full time team in Australia were the SOG in Victoria at that stage, because I think they'd had a Commonwealth Games in Melbourne or something, which caused them to go full time. So I knew it was happening at some point. So I hung in there, and in 1987, I was asked to, it might have been 86, I can't remember, but I was asked to leave the CIB and go into the Tactical Response Group as one of the first full-timers. So jumped at it.
Yeah.
And that was 87, sorry, because in 86 I'd been sent on training courses. I did a bomb disposal course, and I was fairly well regarded. So I was being trained probably with an eye to the squad going full time. So yeah, I did a bomb course, went full time, did the SAS counter instructors course in Swanbourne at the SAS regiment in June 1987, and just loved it. Yeah. I thought, this is my career forever. I saw it as incredibly meaningful. It saved lives, high risk stuff. The adrenaline was back again. Being with a crew or a team of like-minded people, having what we thought was proper equipment in those days, and just basically, again, to be truthful, having a lot of fun.
Yeah.
There's nothing better, and I've said this, and I won't use the same language I used to use, but there's nothing better than crashing in a door at 4 o'clock in the morning and putting a gun in a robber's face and saying, "Please wake up, sir."
Please.
It was just such an exciting, cool place to work. There was always the threat of violence, of course, but we executed hundreds of raids and not a shot was fired.
Yeah. And I think in an environment like that, and you have your team with you, there's such a high level of trust that you have to have with each other that then fosters that bond also. And I think they both sort of coexist, don't they? Because you have to have the trust, but then you have to have the bond to have that. And that's what makes those teams effective, I think, because you know that everyone's got each other's back. You couldn't have someone that you couldn't rely upon in that role.
Yeah, quite literally. You enter a room, that there's certain ways to tactically enter a room. You are literally placing your life in the hands of someone behind you and trusting that he, again, no girls, that he is going to cover your back and engage any threat. And you're doing it with loaded firearms on with safety off. So you've also got to trust that someone is tracking across the back of you with a loaded submachine gun, that they've got their weapon discipline right, and everything's fine, and you likewise with them.
Yeah.
So all of that is an incredibly bonding experience. Plus, when your adrenaline's up and you're cracking in through a door after an armed robber or a prison escapade or whatever, you've got to have your act together, and you've got to be able to. One of the aspects we used to talk about was controlled aggression. So you need to be aggressive, but you need to control it, and it just needs to be done in a teamwork capacity. And I've never experienced that anywhere else. It was awesome.
So something that I do want to talk to you about, because I really think that it's important to talk about and remember people that have made the ultimate sacrifice for the safety of other people. And on the 29th of July in 1987, you experienced a tragic loss of one of the teammates and a friend of yours, Senior Constable Peter Kidd, during a raid that went wrong, I guess you could say. So you You were there to arrest a prison escapee from Long Bay Jail. I think he was number one at the time on the Queensland most wanted list, and he was pretty high on the national most wanted list. He was the real deal. He had some really strong intel there. And from what you shared in your book, Peter himself had raised concerns in relation to the vests that you were going to wear. And you knew that you guys were going into that operation ill-equipped for that level of risk that was involved. And you'd spent some time organising it in a way that you believed was the safest way. Despite his warnings and your concerns, they were shut down, as well as your requests for certain types of equipment that you did have available to you to aid that tactical approach. So this entire situation became a tragedy and a complete failure, I believe, in resources and leadership. At the same time, the Fitzgerald inquiry into corruption had just begun. I think it was the first couple of days into that inquiry.
Yep.
So looking back at that, and I'm sure I would be the same. I'm sure you've thought about it an infinite number of times over the years. But can you walk us through how that all came about and how it felt knowing that Peter had anticipated these risks and that you were all still sent into that situation? How did you process not only that grief from losing a close friend, but also the knowledge that it could have been preventable? Maybe you'll never know. No one will ever know, but that hierarchy could have been more concerned with moving the immediate attention away from that inquiry. I listen to your books because I struggle to read long text, but while listening to your book, I went through some really intense emotions in this particular story. My whole body responded to it. So it went from angry to then obviously devastated for you and your team, but then deep compassion as well, because I can't even imagine how that would have been for you all to deal with in such an intense situation like that.
Yeah, thank you. That I really appreciate your words. It still makes me angry all these years later.
You can imagine, I feel angry now.
Yeah. So in essence, I mean, I could go on about Flashdance for probably a couple of hours, but in essence, the offender was number one. He just escaped from Long Bay 8 or 9 years before something. He was a psychopath. He had committed a number of armed robberies, fired shots in many of them, killed one person in cold blood, crippled another just because he felt like shooting. So we knew full well the type of person we were going in against. And as I said before, I'd completed the counter-terrorist instructors course with the SAS only a month beforehand. And I knew what was involved in what's called a deliberate action, what was necessary. A sergeant and I sat down and designed or wrote the deliberate action order, the operation order. I had included in that order the use of flashbangs or stun grenades, distraction grenades, and tear gas. Both of those were refused permission by those in charge, and I know the names of those in charge, and they're both deceased now. And I don't mention their names out of respect for their families, but these two people, in my view, were probably very much responsible for how that operation went.
Yeah.
Because they refused permission for us to use tactics that we knew were required.
And sorry, did they have the knowledge to stick by that? Like, did they? No, they didn't know what they were talking about.
So there's a difference between leadership and management. You lead people, you manage things. These two people didn't even ask what a distraction grenade was. And I'm sure that when they read the op order, they just went, grenades, we don't use grenades. The answer is no. Yeah. Rather than, as a leader should, seek clarification, seek information. They refused permission to use tear gas because there were 2 children in the house, not understanding that gas was to be pumped into a certain section of the house and wouldn't have affected the kids at all. So that sort of thing.
Yeah.
Peter had also, Pete was another full-timer. He and I started full-time in the group at the same day. We were both excited by it. We both used to joke about who'd be promoted first, and he lived and breathed it as much as I did. Part of his role was equipment. So he'd put in a massive report recommending our ballistic vests be upgraded. And the vests were only really ever designed to repel shotgun or pistol rounds. The offender was armed with a 223 rifle. So, the vests were completely unusable, inappropriate, whatever. So the report he put in was knocked back because of budget. That was just classic policing. Let's not worry. It still makes me angry.
Yeah.
Let's not worry about, the impact it has on saving lives. It's about money. So we knew full well that we were going into that job under-equipped, and that the tactical plan was not what it should have been.
Yeah.
So my idea, the only diversion I could come up with was to station a team under the offender's window. And it was a sort of classic Brisbane house where the land at the front sloped away. So under the front of the house was maybe about 1.5 metre drop. And it turned out later that the offender had actually built a trapdoor to escape via that. If he'd been able to get through a trapdoor into that drop, he was gone. So I put a team outside there and said to them, or their instructions were, we will try to enter covertly. If we can't, you hear the hammer smash the door, throw a ladder through the window to have him believe you're climbing up through the window. So they did all of that. And within the split second of us hammering in the back door, he was up and fired 2 rounds through the skirting board at the ladder where he thought a team would be climbing. So he was shooting it out regardless. He had changed the way the back door opened to have it swing outwards rather than inwards, which stopped us by probably 3 to 5 seconds, and it's a long time in a tactical world. So we entered the house. Pete was number 1 in the team. I was the team leader, and the order of march requires the team leader is the 4th. So the team leader can make decisions and whatever. And that's haunted me for a long time as well. So we went in, and as we approached the door, we were required, to scream, police, police, don't move, don't move. So he knew we were coming. And as Pete pushed open the bedroom door, he was shot through the door. I saw him shot twice and saw the impact rounds had on him. And then I saw him take a step forward, aim at something inside the room, and then there was more gunfire. And then in the next, it's really hard to remember, maybe 20 seconds, there was a gunfight. So another team member started engaging the offender. Then a very small door, very small bedroom. I went in behind him. I engaged the offender, and the offender was killed. And Pete was in the corner. He'd been hit 5 times, once through the wrist, 4 at the body. And all the rounds had gone through his vest, as we knew they would. And one of those tragic experiences, when we're briefing the crew the night before, because we'd been rehearsing this for 2 days. We'd looked at everything. One of the armed robbery squad detectives picked up the vest Pete was laying out, because he laid all the equipment out for us, etc. And said, mate, will this stop a 223? And Pete said, no, God, no, it'll go through it like a knife through butter, hot knife through butter. And he was right.
Mm.
And he died that morning in hospital, and it just devastated us all, So I had a combination of grief and anger, and what I now know is post-traumatic stress.
Yeah.
No one knew what it was in those days. So, we were interviewed by the homicide squad, partly so, because the offender was dead. All of that stuff, that process has to happen. But, in that in the 80s, late 80s attitude, I suppose, in policing, the homicide squad detectives were brilliant. They could see that I was, I can only speak personally. I was separated from the others, of course. They could see how full of grief I was. And so their answer was to take us upstairs to the police club and get us pissed.
Yeah.
And because that's what we thought. That's what, the coping mechanisms were, of course. And, I just ascended into this whole depth of darkness and anger and sadness and grief and alcohol. And, I look back on it now, and just classic symptoms of post-traumatic stress. Because the disorder, as you probably know, comes when it affects your life for more than 6 to 8 weeks.
Yeah.
Mine knocked me around for 30 years.
Yeah.
So I just went through all of that pretty much immediately. And I was seething with anger for years. And post that job, and again, I look at all this in hindsight, and I've gone through this with my psychiatrist. She's brilliant. We unravel this stuff a lot. That's when I started rebelling even more against authority, against, those those in command who, while it may have held the rank but had no ability, I was just openly contemptuous of, so quite career limiting in hindsight. But I just never wanted that to happen to any of my people again. And the other side of the coin was I wanted to be in every dangerous job I could because I wanted to kill everybody.
Yeah.
I wanted to kill as many crooks as I could, So all of that darkness really just overtook me as a human being, and I'm not proud of those years, but I hid it quite well. I think my undercover experience came to the fore where I just put on this mask. I'm okay. All is good. But underneath there was this whole seething, dark, angry young man.
Mm. Yeah, I can't even imagine like the anger that you would have felt. And I think that leads a lot of people out of the job as well. That distrust of management and knowing knowing that they probably don't know as much as what they think they do, but also they're not keeping everyone safe. Just leads on to my next question, actually. Like
Sure.
from your perspective as a police officer with the experience that you had, and then you moved on to become a detective sergeant in charge of a team, I guess, and
Yep.
a handler as well for some
Yep.
undercover.
Yep.
Do you think in today's police forces across our country, even the world, that they still have these systemic failures in leadership?
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
do you think they're doing enough to protect the people and the boots on the ground?
You know, sadly,
Mm.
sadly, the answer is I think it still happens.
Yeah, I think so too.
I know that the promotion system is, I get this from current serving cops, both here in Victoria and my friends in Queensland. It's it's heavily weighted towards favoritism and nepotism. So whilst there's a merit-based promotion system allegedly in place, the reality is it's who you know.
Yeah.
People are looked after, and if they are politically astute, they will be promoted to positions of leadership, of command. I won't call it leadership, of command that they're totally unsuited for.
Mm.
It's God, there are myriad examples of that. The problem is people are, and not all of them, by the way. There are some senior police I've met who I've got a lot of respect for. Sadly, in my experience, the numbers who are inept outweigh those who are capable. And those who are capable generally aren't chasing the next promotion. They're more concerned with the welfare and safety of their people and the public.
Yeah.
That does them in bad stead because they're not spending their time climbing a political ladder. Often, yeah, people who are promoted to very senior positions are politicians. They're not operational cops. And, a lot of them have spent a little time operationally, but then have worked in headquarters, carpet strolling, making alliances and allegiances. And that's the sad reality of it. And I see that across, when I read, when I watch footage, I see that across the world. It's the focus. It's one of the reasons I left. I had to leave. I just resigned. I could have taken a medical retirement, but I just left.
Yeah.
Because I could see, in my opinion, that policing was changing from protecting people to becoming a corporate hologram, and becoming politically correct is not the right term, but becoming so risk averse and concerned with public opinion that the core function of policing, preservation of life and protection of property, was lost. And I see that now.
Yeah.
I see that, the way policing is conducted across the country. It's heartbreaking.
Yeah, it is. And I think
Yep.
you're right. Like they're just so risk adverse
Yeah.
that it's gone the other way.
Well, they're told now that, they'll be charged with assault or misconduct or whatever. And,
Yeah.
body worn cameras, I think, are a bit of a double-edged tool,
Yeah.
double-edged sword. They're to protect people. That's great. But for God's sake, make a decision, exercise your powers of authority.
Yeah.
And it's not the individual cops that I criticize or observe. it's the way that they're taught. It's the leadership. One of my favourite stories, and I think it was the 80s in Victoria, was a police commissioner, Mick Miller, who everyone who knew him loved him. He was the boss, and he was a leader. And there was a kidnapping. I think it was the crook's name was Eastwood. I may be wrong, but this guy kidnapped a busload of school children, demanded a ransom. Detected there was a setup. The alleged hand over the money. He was arrested. During the scuffle, he produced a firearm. He was shot in the leg by a detective. And the commissioner was sitting at a press conference that day, and one of the journalists said to him, "Well, your detective shot the offender in the leg. That's right, he did. What action do you propose to take about him? I'll send him to the target range. Next question, please." You know, that's what it should be. And it's our people take, and a true leader would be saying, yes, there was an arrest. Yes. Okay, next question. But cops now are told that they will lose their jobs potentially if they do the wrong thing. But the other side of that is they don't take immediate action. This guy injures someone, produces a knife, whatever, and a police officer or a bystander is killed or worse, then their actions will be soundly criticised.
100%.
So they're just not.
They can't win.
I don't know. I just don't get it.
Yeah.
And I try not to comment on things I'm not involved in, but it's bloody hard sometimes.
Okay, so you just mentioned that you left the police of your own accord.
Yep.
And I think in your books you said you didn't feel like you were happy to promote, and like what you just said, like it just wasn't for you anymore. How was that experience for you, just leaving?
It was tough. It was tough because transitioning out from an occupation I'd been in since I was 16, that was the core part of my identity. And it was tough to leave that behind. I just started writing a third book about that stage.
Good.
Yeah. I hope so.
Yeah.
There's no gunfights. There's no, that sort. But it's really about working in the private sector and navigating through all of that sociopathic tendencies by certain people as well. But I've actually just written about that, how hard it was. Just the last thing I put on the desk was my ID. And moving into the private sector, it's interesting. People don't really care about what you've done as a cop, not because they don't care, but because they don't understand. And it's a bit confronting for them, I found, because I'd had medals and I had publicity and all that. It still embarrasses me a bit, but people would say, "Oh, yeah, you were in. Did you ever shoot anybody?" And I'd say, "Yeah, I did," and they'd be horrified. And I think, well, don't ask the question if you don't want the answer.
Why would you ask?
And all of those things to navigate and understand that normal people aren't experienced to the world that we've been experienced to. And I took it for granted that they'd understand that world. And then I had the other side of it where people would say, "Oh, you left the police force, did you? Why was that?"
I guess especially at that time as well.
Yeah, intimating that I'd left under a cloud. So all of that was challenging. Then moving into a world that I don't think I ever really completely fitted into, because I was still carrying all of that stuff that I now know was PTSD, anxiety and depression. And I was covering it with a veil of alcohol for a long time. So, I'd get quite, and part of the disorder is you get quite angry very quickly.
Yes.
So I'd sit in meetings and someone would disagree with me and I'd think, "Can't you see the logic in this, you clown?" And then I get angry with them and I want to reach across and grab them by the throat. All of that stuff, which is, geez whiz. In hindsight, if I'd understood what I was going through, I would have been able to deal with that a lot better. Okay? I remember being in retail. I was a national risk manager for a particular company, newly appointed, and my general manager got me in after about 3 weeks or something and said, "Oh, there's been a complaint." I said, "About me?" And he said, "Yeah, one of your team, you were having a disagreement with him and he complained you glared at him really badly." And I remember thinking, glared at him? He's lucky I didn't punch the bejesus out of him. So transition is interesting. And I guess part of my reflection on it was I was still wedded to that whole camaraderie thing in the cops. And
Mm.
I judged other people based on the relationships I'd had in the cops, which was completely unfair to them.
Yeah.
And I realized it took me a while to figure out that, there are some pretty nice people outside the cops, and they've just lived a life that's pretty sheltered, and I shouldn't be judging them for that. But it took a while to get to that stage. And I moved from Brisbane to Melbourne about a year after I resigned. And it was quite lonely for me because, again, my friends were in Brisbane and I didn't have the ability to form friendships with people, probably because I didn't trust anybody,
Mm-hmm.
because I was burned by my experience. I didn't trust managers. The whole retail world is full of, sorry to any retailers listening, but tends to be full of people who react emotionally and almost hysterically to situations rather than take a good, calm look. So for years, as I worked my way through positions to seniority, I guess, I'd often have people say, geez, Keith, you don't panic about things. No, I don't.
Yeah. Yeah.
No,
Because,
because
there's
no
much
one,
greater things that happen in the world.
yeah, that's right. And I used to say, because no one's going to die today as a result of our
Absolutely.
decisions. Let's just take a bit of a breath. Um, oh, you're so calm. Yeah, I guess I am. Again, no one's going to die today, folks. So that was that was having to learn to change probably my lens of the world,
Yeah.
and understand that people do get excited and upset about what I used to think were fairly minor things, and that's okay. That's okay for them.
Yeah.
Whereas the probably first 10 years I judged them pretty harshly.
Hmm. Yeah, no, I can relate to that. I know that I had my lenses were a bit skewed, I guess, when I left as well and found it very difficult to trust people. It's something that I've spoken about. I speak about it very openly and very honestly is my diagnosis with PTSD and how it was one of the best things that ever happened to me was to get that
Mm.
diagnosis. I guess from that point, I knew exactly what I was dealing with. And
Yep.
so I think it gave me permission as well, not only to address it, but to acknowledge that everything that I had been going through wasn't in my imagination because I was always one of those people like, it won't happen to me, like most people. Um, and look, I know your diagnosis was it 30 years after you left?
2019. So I left in 95. So 25 years,
Yeah, yeah,
26
yeah.
years,
That's a long time.
something. I don't know.
How did you
Anyway,
go? How was
24
that?
years. Sorry,
Yeah.
it's just some quick
No, it's kids
arithmetic.
to do the maths. So 24 years. But
Yeah, 24 years.
how did you deal with that, with everything that was going on for you and moving into a new world in your
Mm,
job role, but also having a wife and children?
mm.
Um, how was that process in that 24 years? And then at which point in your life did you think to seek help and get ultimately that diagnosis? How did
Oh
that
yeah,
happen?
another really good question. I didn't know. I just thought I
Yeah.
had some anger issues. I knew I drank too much. I knew I was angry. I was never physically violent to my family. I would never do that. But I just had, yeah, just a short fuse. If someone had we'd be sitting down having family dinner at 6:30 at night or something, and the doorbell went, I'd be seething with anger. How dare someone interrupt family time? Or the phone would ring, the old landline would ring, I'd
Yeah.
be seething with anger. Just I look back now and go, my God. But I thought that was just normal. And my wife put up with so much. And she just thought that was just my personality.
Mm.
And after my diagnosis, I sat down with both my girls and my daughters and apologized to them, and they're lovely. They just said we remember it a different way, Dad.
Mm.
Which is lovely. Almost
Mhm.
makes me cry every time. Um, and my wife said, "Well, now we know.
Yeah.
She said, I just thought you were a freak. A lot of the time, and
Yes.
and yeah, which is quite natural, I guess. And now we know it's a disorder and a traumatic brain injury. Then okay, shit, I'm still not very comfortable with what I was like, but like you, it was incredibly empowering.
Mm.
So, but going through it all, I don't know. Look, I caught up with Spider, who was next undercover guy. He went to jail for a couple of years because he went to the wrong side of the line, made a stupid decision. But he came out and we reconnected, and I spent some time with him in New South Wales, and he was the one who started me thinking about it. It's so, how many times do you lock the door at night? how many times do you do this? Do you get angry about stuff? You know, you might have PTSD. And I went, nah, PTSD, not me. That's for people who've served in Afghanistan or Iraq, you know, been in dangerous shit.
Mm.
Yeah. And I just thought, no, I just counted it. And then my mum was tragically killed in a road accident in 2012 and I fell off the cliff. But before that, 2006, I'd had a major, major anxiety attack with no catalyst, just froze
I
to
don't
the
know.
ground. Horrible. So I started talking to a counsellor then, but I still didn't believe that counselling was for me. She did some rapid eye movement, made me feel better. Then I went back. Then I went, nah, I'm fine. Then I went back, nah, I'm fine. And when Mum was killed, I lapsed into a state of depression, and I'm very sure that everything had come back. So I went to my doctor. We talked about it. Started antidepressants, which made me feel sort of normal because the pit of anxiety I'd had in my stomach for years was suddenly gone. I went, okay, well, if the meds are working, that's fantastic. And thought, yeah, maybe I should talk to someone. But I liken it, you know, when I do keynotes, I talk to people and always get to laugh because many true things are said in jest.
Mm-hmm.
Finding the right counselor or psychologist is like speed dating, you know.
Mm-hmm.
You go, yeah, I like the look of you. No, you're not for me. Oh, yeah, no, you're not. No, no. Yeah, I get along with you. No, you're not. Oh, hello. I might spend time with you. And for me, that was finding the right psychiatrist, was exactly that. I went through a succession of counselors. I went through, you know, I think I think a couple of them were a bit more screwed up than I was. But one who, you know, I was sitting and talking with him about the impact on my family and how they reacted to me. He started to criticize them. So, well, what you need to do is tell them they need to understand you a lot better. But wait a minute, that's not what I'm here for.
Mm.
But not one of them gave me a diagnosis. And so that led me to believe erroneously that I didn't have PTSD because otherwise, why would they have not
They
picked
would
it
have
up?
told me, yeah.
So I met, I was referred to the current person and had an hour with her. And she was the first I remember who listened intently. And then at the end of the hour, because humor is my defense mechanism,
Mm-hmm.
so Doc, what do you reckon? You know, and she said, Keith, she said, you have chronic PTSD, anxiety, and probably depression. And she said, her words, she said, I'm just amazed at your resilience. And many other people would have curled in a corner years before now. I went, wow. And like you, I just found that incredibly empowering because I thought, okay, I haven't been imagining it. It's a disorder, but it's not bipolar. It's not, you know, personality disorder. It's not that I'm an asshole. It's just that I actually have PTSD. So, okay, what do we do now?
Yeah.
And that just even that conversation was a massive part of my recovery because I remember they make me cry now. Like I'm so emotional these days. I contained all my emotions for
Yeah.
so long.
No, I'm the
Um,
same. I'll cry at the drop of it.
yeah, I go, wow. I remember ringing my wife and bursting into tears, and you
Mm.
know, and just saying, "Oh fuck, I've got this."
Mm.
Wow, you know, and then it was really um, the antidepressants. I thought, okay, they have a certain scientific basis for sure, but as I got better, I sat with my GP and spaced myself off them. Excuse me. So I don't use antidepressants anymore. I've discovered the power of conversation,
Yeah.
really authentic conversation. You know, for a long time, I couldn't tell my wife what I was thinking or feeling. I wasn't brave enough to. I don't think she was able to hear it then either.
Yeah.
So through all of this, we now just go, okay, this is how I'm feeling. You know, this is making me feel. What about you? Um, Same with my daughters, we have open conversations. Same with people I know, and part of that I think is hugely beneficial. Understanding the causes, understanding the triggers, understanding the power of breath now. Yeah. Wow. You know, all of those things that I probably would have written off as being quite esoteric
Yes.
20 years ago, I now espouse to everyone. Exercise, joyfulness, you know, pets, conversation, mindfulness, all of that stuff is just so incredibly helpful.
Yeah.
And every chance I get, I talk to people I know who are struggling and suffering and say, hey, this worked for me, give it a crack.
Yeah. Yeah. I'm exactly the same. Just like
Yeah.
it helped me. And I like to think, as a tactical cop, and I did my bit in weapons training, and there's a tactical options model, right? So you've got all
Mm.
your different
Yeah.
appointments and arms, and then I think your mental health um, treatment, I guess you could say, is exactly like that. So you have all these options that are available to you, and you can pick and choose those things as to what you need at the time. Your talk therapy or your mindfulness or your breath work. I don't think,
Mm.
or medication, even
Yep.
all of those things. Like it's not a one size sort of fits all. It's a, pick what you need
Yeah.
type of thing. Yeah.
Yeah. Totally agree. Yeah.
Mm. And just with that, talking to people, I think conversations that I have with people now are much deeper than I've ever had in my life before. It goes so much deeper than surface level. And I think I encourage that because I know what I need. And, when you say to your friend or something, how are you? And, oh, yeah, good. How are you actually today, though?
Yeah.
How are things
Yeah.
going for you? And it gives them permission. Or I'll say, I'm not doing very well myself. And then that gives them permission to say, okay, yep, me either, actually. X, Y, and Z's happened. And I
Yeah.
just feel like there's so much power in conversations with people. And one of the reasons that I started the podcast was so that conversations with people like yourself can make other people have a little bit of a think or make them feel like, yeah, I'm not the only one that's gone through this particular thing. And there's so much power in that for people.
Yeah.
Mm.
Absolutely. Look, it's like looking into a mirror, except you're far better looking. That's that's exactly how I feel.
Mm.
It's having an authentic, and I hate using buzzwords, but
Yeah.
having an authentic conversation with someone. So I've got my friends in Queensland. I call them my brothers by choice, and I ring them at least once a week, or vice versa. Yeah, and we have those conversations. We have deep conversations we never would have dreamt of back in our cop lives, and we end each one by saying, "I love you, mate."
Yeah.
And we never would have said that and meant it.
Mm.
So it's a real shift in attitude and understanding, and having that ability, even though it's later in life, to just be fair income and open, and be there for each other. And friends of mine in Melbourne now, retired police or police who've left because of medical conditions or whatever, and ADF people.
Mm.
I'm so blessed to be in this network of men and women who fought overseas in the Afghan and Iraq theatres, that I'm accepted as one of them, and accepted as one of them because we share all of this
Yeah.
openness, which is just brilliant.
Yeah.
And it's not just us, though, Rosie. It's everybody. Everybody is affected by some level of trauma,
Absolutely.
whether it's childhood, relationship, work, whatever things they may have seen or witnessed or been involved in, and you've got moral injury on top of that.
Mhm.
So everybody can benefit from this type of conversation, I reckon. It's a shame it took me so long to find it, but it's better than not having found it at all.
Yes. Yeah. Imagine
Mm.
still
Yeah.
being where you were. Yeah.
Oh, God, yeah. Yeah.
It's something that I did want to ask you actually.
Sure.
Given the history that you've had in those high adrenaline roles as an undercover officer and in the tactical response group, how do you satisfy that need now? Or have you found new ways to channel that energy or just cope with not having that adrenaline rush anymore? How do you do that?
Yeah, there used to be a place in Melbourne where you could do rap jumping, which was carabiner rundowns from the seven floors.
Oh,
You
yeah,
know,
yeah.
so yeah, adrenaline, like abseiling but running forward.
Hmm.
Sadly, that closed down a few years ago. But I train in martial arts. I'm a martial artist, so I train in karate dojos at least 3 times, if not 4 times a week. And probably not a replacement for adrenaline, but it's tribe, it's
Hmm.
connection, it's shared purpose, and we do get punched in the face. So, and part of it is BJJ as well. So all of that stuff really satisfies for me the need to get the adrenaline pumping, because it still is,
Hmm. Hmm.
it's still a combative sport, and a bit of gym work and so on. But I think I've probably lost the need to have that incredible rush.
Yeah.
and part of my self-reflection is I've probably had my fair share of adrenaline plus somebody else's in my life.
Yes.
So I don't have that all-consuming need for it anymore. I'm more about, yeah, just doing things that give me purpose and enjoyment. And martial arts is one of them.
Yeah. Yeah. I guess that helps too with your PTSD as well, like all
Yeah,
that breathing and movement and martial arts. Yeah.
absolutely. Yeah, there's a lot of breath similarity with certain breathing kata and breath work for sure.
Yeah. Um, so I want to talk about your books because they're so good.
Thank you. Thank
I'm
you.
actually reading it for a second time. The first one. So I love them. And I'll
No,
tell
thank
anyone
you.
I can about them. They're called Drugs, Guns, and Lies: My Life as an Undercover Cop, and Gun to the Head: My Life as a Tactical Cop, The Impact, the Aftermath. And like I said, I listen to audiobooks. So that's how I get my fix of reading these days.
Yeah,
And
cool.
I was painting my house while I was listening to them. And I don't think my husband listens, but I was sort of almost making excuses to go and paint so I could just listen to the books.
Thank you.
Um,
That's nice.
um, yeah, which is funny. But the way you've written them is so beautiful because it's such a real and honest and no bullshit um, account of your time in the police. And I really love that so much because I think there can be a bit of fluff added sometimes to books.
Sure. Yeah. Yeah.
And I've really enjoyed that part of it. And writing about such intense experiences must have been not only challenging, but cathartic, I think, as well. What led you to doing that, to writing your stories and putting the pen to paper or fingers on
Yeah.
keyboard?
Yeah. Well, cathartic, absolutely.
Mm.
I wanted to start, I don't know, it was probably, gee, not long after my mum was killed, I guess. And I was working through some stuff and I wanted to just write a couple of things down to give my girls, my daughters, because I was starting to understand that I wasn't right, and that I needed to do some changes. And so the first chapter I wrote was about the MLC siege, where I spent an hour and a half with Frank, who had a box full of gelignite and a hand grenade and whatever. And I wrote about that, and I gave it to my eldest daughter to read, and she went, "Wow, Dad, this is great."
Mm.
Gave it to another friend of mine at my karate dojo who came back next week and said, "I want to read more."
Yeah, I can
And
imagine.
and so I just started putting together some disparate chapters,
Mhm.
about some things. And then I ran into a guy. For everyone who knows me, this is no surprise. Ran into a guy at a pub. Um, it was sitting at a nearby table when I was regaling my friends with some stories about my undercover time. And his partner said, "Oh, you should write a book." So we got chatting, and I said, "Yeah, I'd love to. I need a ghostwriter." And she said, "Well, actually, my partner does exactly that." Right. So Ben and I then communicated over probably 3 years, and he encouraged me to keep writing stuff, because I suffered massive imposter syndrome.
Yeah.
Thought, who'd want to read my shit, And so back and forth, and I'd have 3 or 4 months where I wouldn't write anything, and he'd ring me and go, "Come on, mate, let's get into this." So, you know, that's why I gave him a co-author status, because he really helped me. He motivated me to write, and he'd round off the rough edges, I guess.
Mhm.
Taught me a little bit about writing and so on. He got a bit flowery, so then I'd go, "No, I don't want that in, because
Yeah.
that's not who I am." Um, so back and forth, and the first thing took maybe 4 years, I
Mm.
reckon. And I'm so blessed. Because of my medals, I'm part of the Australian Bravery Association, which is an association to support people who've gone through traumatic incidents, predominantly civilians
Mhm.
who do brave stuff and then struggle as a result. It's a fantastic
Yeah.
support organisation. So I just posted something in a closed Facebook group after the first book was really done. We'd written maybe 110,000 words or something. So put it on there and said, "Look, I've finished a manuscript about my stuff. Anybody got any suggestions what I should do?" In essence, someone came back on immediately who'd been published and put me in touch with two publishers. The hardest thing about getting a manuscript published is being read. So again, very blessed. Within, I don't know, a week,
Yeah.
the chief guy from Alan Unwin came back and said, I've read a couple of chapters. I want more. Let's have a conversation. So yeah, edited it off. I changed the ending to finish where it did.
Mhm.
And I was left with about another 20,000 words or something that I ended up scrapping and just wrote the second one by
Yeah.
myself from the beginning. But yeah, essentially sent it off, and my wife and I were in Vietnam holidaying, and we got an email to go, here's your contract, and we want you to publish. I went, holy shit. And then in our notorious lockdown in Victoria, he takes a big sigh so he doesn't get angry again. Um, uh, I was just working remotely. I finished my stuff with my team. I was the COO of a member association. And I just sat here one day and went, I've got to fill some time in. I know, I'm going to start writing. So I started writing the second one. And again, because I had so much more to tell, and because I had so much confidence from the fact that the first book was so beautifully accepted by the reading public, that kicked my imposter syndrome off my shoulder for a while. And then I just started writing the second one and just wrote without any ghostwriter, really. And I think the second one's better, but that's just me. And and I just started writing. I think I'd written about 3 chapters or something. And the publisher came back coincidentally and said, "Hello, Keith. Wondering what you're doing. I'm really keen to see what is still in store." So I sent him the 3 chapters I'd written. He sent back another contract, advance payment, and went, "Right, here's your timeline. Make it happen."
Yeah. Hurry
Um, yeah. So for me, it was I've said often to people, if a person who's not had much experience with the police can read my books and at the end of them go, holy shit, there's more to being a cop than I ever imagined. And that changes their opinion or it changes the way they look at police from that time on, that would make me incredibly happy because most people think being a cop is all about writing traffic tickets,
Mm.
or going to road accidents. They have very little concept of the human impact or the impact it has on humans doing that
Yeah.
role. And in my second book, my wife looked at I didn't do the cover photography, all that. That comes from the publisher, and that's all good.
Yeah.
So did the titles, actually, after much conversation between them and me. But Jen looked at the second one and went, I think you should include something there, the impact of it and the aftermath. So that's all her,
Yeah.
which I'm very proud of for doing that because it's exactly what that book's about. Yeah.
Mm.
So yeah, so both things. It's wanting to change people's opinions. It's a need in me to tell the stories of particularly Peter Kidd and other things I was involved in, not with me as the central character. I hope it doesn't come across that way, but just the stories that need to be told and recorded, I think, because that era in Queensland was pretty challenging.
Yeah.
But also, the second one is about recovery. And it's about the fact that you can get through this stuff, that you're not alone, and the impact on people that the impact that people have had on me in helping me through all of that. I thought really needed some credit, and that's why I wrote about that.
Yeah. I think you definitely captured all of that amazingly. Like I've not read a book. Especially, I love autobiographies. It's my go-to type of book to
Oh,
read. I
good.
pretty much don't
Yeah.
read anything else, unless it's to do with yoga or mindfulness or something like that. But if I'm going to sit and read one, it's definitely an autobiography. And it made me, I guess, emotional as well from being a cop and thinking back on my own time. I mean, yours was, a few years before mine, and then thinking, comparing my timeline, I guess that time when I was in the police in the 2000s and yours in the 80s and 90s, how different it was, but also still very similar with the relationships that you form with people in the job.
Yeah.
And then, how you again miss it, and then relationships that you form with people that aren't in the job, like you had a time there where you were doing some witness protection, and that relationship that you form with that person as well.
Yeah.
Like I've really loved reading and learning about those stories as well, because it did make me reflect a little bit, which I think is so beautiful. And for people that haven't been in the police, I definitely think that you have achieved what you set out to achieve there as well.
Oh, thank you.
So
Thank you.
congratulations. I'm really looking forward to a third one. Can't
Well, I
wait.
hope it's as interesting. But so I'll do the same thing. I'll sort of do 3 or 4 chapters, send it off to my publisher and see what they say.
Wait for the check to come.
Well, unfortunately, you don't make a lot of money as an author.
Yeah, no, I have heard that.
Only if you sell hundreds of thousands of books. But it's not about that. It's
Yeah.
what it's done for me is it's given me the ability to appear on podcasts like this
Yeah.
and put my message out there to as many people as I can, which is always really beneficial for me to talk about this, even though I've done it so many times. It's still great for me, makes it easier a little bit every time. But I also know there are people that listen to my stuff um, and it has a positive impact on them. Because I know I get messages from a lot of people who have thought they've struggled alone. Like you and I have spoken about, you always think you're the only one
Yeah.
going through it, and the
You do.
reality is you're not. And it's given me that ability to be there. It's given me that ability to do some media. It's all of that is what I feel incredibly grateful for, because it's such an important conversation to have, and people like you and I literally save lives. Guarantee it. There are people listening to podcasts like this and go, okay, maybe I do need to get some help.
Yeah.
Maybe getting help's not weak. Maybe getting help is a good thing. Yeah.
Yeah, I agree. I mean, like I said to you in the first email, I've read your books and I really wanted to get you on. And then I got really intimidated and I didn't do anything about it. And one of my friends actually sent me a message and said, "Oh, have you heard of Keith Banks?" I'm like, "Yes, I have." He's like, "Have you seen that TV show?" And I said, "No, I have not. I'm going to watch it." "All right, I'll watch it." I watched The Investigators. And then at the end of the second episode, you said, "The beauty of these conversations and connections is that you know that you're not alone. And that is so powerful." And then immediately after I switched that off, I sent you the email because I'm like,
Oh,
Keith
wow.
is just like me. And that's the entire premise of the podcast, is that to share stories of real human people that have gone through some shit and managed to come out the other side. Because when you're in that, I think sometimes you don't think that will ever happen.
Yeah.
And I've got the ham, cheese, and tomato of mental health as well, like PTSD, anxiety, and depression.
Yeah.
And the depression especially is tricky because it's very sticky.
Yeah.
And it's hard to come out of it. So I just really want to thank you for coming on, because I totally agree with you. It's so important to share our stories in the hope that it will help other people, but hopefully save lives as well. And that other people realize that it's worth sticking around for.
Yeah.
I started after just seeing one too many, deaths by suicide of police and veterans. And
Yeah.
it breaks my heart every time I see another one. But
Yeah.
I usually end with a little piece of advice or something that you might like to share for those people that I hope to reach that might be having a tough time, to give them a bit of hope, other than your whole story. It's so
Yeah.
hopeful. But do you have anything that you like to share in relation to
Yeah.
that?
I guess, and first of all, thank you for inviting me on, Rosie. This has been one of the most enjoyable podcasts I've done, because you actually get it, and people with that lived experience just, we understand it without even having to verbalize it. And
Yeah.
so, but I guess the advice that the advice I'd give is understand that no one will judge you if you pick up a phone and want to talk to someone. The thing that kept me from being authentic about how I was feeling and what I was going through for such a long time was the fear of being judged, the fear of being thought that I would be perceived as being weak. And that, that need for constant affirmation that I was an okay person is part of the disorder, So don't be afraid. If there's someone that you can trust in your life, don't be afraid to have a conversation with them and say, "I'm not doing too well. Can I spend some time talking to you?" And if you're listening to this as someone who is approached to listen, my advice is shut the hell up. Don't try and solve a problem. Just be there for someone to talk to. Yeah. And be a part of an ongoing support for them. So they're the two pieces of advice I have, I guess. Don't be afraid. Don't let it hold you back, because that first conversation you have with someone about how you're feeling will change your life. I guarantee it.
Absolutely. Yeah. Thank you so much. Especially that second bit where if someone comes to you, you don't need to fix their problems. You just
Yeah,
need to be there for them so they
yeah,
can voice them sometimes.
yeah.
Mm,
They just want someone to sit with.
yeah. Yeah. So powerful. You do lots of work now in relation to mental health, and you said that you do some speaking. So, where
Yeah.
can people find you if they want to get you to speak or
Oh,
anything that
thank
you're up
you.
to?
Yeah, you can jump on my website, which I put seconds of thought into. It's keithbanks.com.au.
So
Um,
good.
and it's a bit clunky, you know. I put it together a few years ago when my book was first released. I'm working on another one, but you can certainly find me through there. Um, you know, so there's some cute little photos and whatever. But yeah, if anyone is there, and I'm on LinkedIn again under Keith Banks, or Instagram on Banksy175.
Awesome. I'll link
So
to all that in the show notes.
yeah,
Yeah.
thank you. But yeah, that's I enjoy it. I get such a kick out of standing in front of a group of people talking about this and seeing the light bulbs go on.
Yeah.
Um, and I'm blessed. I'm one of those people that has no fear of public speaking. You give me a microphone, an audience, I'm in my element, you know, as you can probably tell. Um, but you know, which is a very yeah, it's a blessing to
Yeah.
have that. Yeah.
Awesome. Thanks again for coming on. I actually forgot for a while there, probably a good hour, that we were recording a podcast.
Oh
Just
yeah,
really enjoyed
yeah,
chatting
me
to
too.
you.
Well, that's great. That's the way
It
it should
is.
be, I reckon.
It is. Yeah, it's so good. But
Mm.
thank you so much for coming on. It's been a joy.
Thank you. It's an honor to be invited, and I love what you do. You should be
Thank
proud of
you.
yourself.
I hope you've enjoyed today's episode. If you have, make sure to hit subscribe so you never miss any new ones. We release fresh content every Tuesday. And while you're there, take a moment to leave us a review. I would genuinely appreciate your thoughts. Don't forget to connect with me on Instagram and Facebook at Tactical Yoga Australia and share this episode with your friends, family, and workmates to spread inspiration. Your support means the world. My name is Rosie Skeen. Join me again next week for another empowering and positive episode of Triumph Beyond Trauma. Until then, be kind to your mind and trust in the magic of your consistent and positive efforts. Triumph beyond your trauma is closer than you think. Have the best week.